How would you characterize the global trade outlook over the next 2 to 3 years?
Disrupted and chaotic. I think that's how we've been for the last 2 years, well, certainly over the last 12 months. And that kind of chaos and disruption is going to continue because we're in a period where we're watching the slow, sometimes rapid collapse of the structures that have governed trade and economic engagement for decades. And that process of sort of collapse or disintegration, it's not wholesale. It's not everything is breaking and we're never going to trade. I'm not suggesting that. But the glue that has held us together is dissolving. And the question now is how quickly it dissolves. In some areas it's faster, in other areas it's slower. And then how we rebuild is completely unclear.
What is the biggest single factor likely to reshape trade?
Well, I think it's every week that you ask this question, it would be a different answer. If you ask this question in this particular week, and you always have to clarify when were we talking exactly, like literally to the minute, I would say, you know, conflict is clearly part of the agenda in a way that it may have been less obvious, or at least, let me rephrase that. It was less obvious to Asia that conflict mattered, because although, of course, we had issues going on, for example, in Ukraine, that was less important for Asia. This situation at the moment in the Gulf is very tangible, and the impact will be felt quite strongly here in Asia in a way that other conflicts weren't. This is unusual. We don't normally have this kind of conflict, of course, and that has significant trade implications, sometimes in areas that you don't expect. And so that kind of, again, we're in an evolving system. Shock to the system in one area creates uncertain ripple effects in others. That's what's making it so difficult to come up with a prediction of where do you think we're going to be next week, let alone next month, next year.
What new trade corridors are emerging?
Again, I think the challenge we're facing is that we are recording this at a time when some corridors that looked very promising, particularly sort of Asia, Middle East, or in Asia, Africa, appears to be quite disrupted. How long that lasts, we don't know. So we're in a period where even corridors that appeared to be very promising may continue to be promising or may not. And so the uncertainty, I think, continues. But in general, I would say, again, what is new? We are not going to have we're going to have more in US for US, potentially in China for China. It's a little unclear at the moment, but I think what is on the table now for companies is a real desire for diversification, for lowering risk. And to do that, it means that they have to start thinking harder. What do we do? Where do we do it? Why do we do it? And in many cases, we need to diversify our business operations, which means looking for new trade partners. And ultimately, that creates new trade corridors as lots of businesses move in that direction.
There's much talk about supply chain shifts. What structural changes are we likely to see in the next 2 or 3 years?
For me, one of the biggest shifts has been the addition of a new discussion point that I never heard before, in US for US. We used to hear in China for China, or in China for Asia, in Europe for Europe, but what is new is in US for US. I think that trend will accelerate because the US remains a very interesting, lucrative market. It's been very important for trade across the region, but the level of disruption makes it hard to sustain. So I think we will see in US for US. We could see some companies thinking about in China for China, but we will also start thinking in unusual ways. In China for Africa, right? At some point, but I don't think it will be in your 2-year time frame, we will start to see in Africa for Africa by sometimes firms that are outside of Africa. So, you know, we're partnering and building up experiences and so forth. So I think, again, we're at the very early stages of some major reshuffling, including of supply chains.
What impact will AI have on global trade?
I think AI is going to have a number of consequences. In the short run, it's having consequences in the movement of goods and how firms prepare customs documentation, for example. The models at the moment are getting better, still not enough to be able to rely wholly on AI just to manage your internal customs paperwork, but 2 years from now, perhaps. So that's where you're starting to see it in the trade space. but also in things like sales or marketing, finding new markets, designing product packaging that is more fit for localized markets, et cetera. So I think it will spread quite quickly, including in a lot of the services related to trade. Again, logistics, legal, travel and tourism. I can imagine a lot more AI applications that will have trade implications than people imagine.
Despite the chaos and the fragmentation, are you expecting trade generally to continue to grow?
Again, if you'd asked me this a week ago, I probably would have said yes. Now I'm a bit more skeptical just because of if this conflict in the Middle East continues, which is a big if, the scale of that disruption to trade flows is substantial. And that, even if it ends quickly, will take a while to work through the system. So if we're talking about in the next 2 years, the disruption I think is going to be significant enough to knock global trade flows back across a 2-year period. It's unclear. If it continues, yes. But I don't think we're not done with trade. We're just moving to sort of different patterns of behavior, and ultimately consumers and businesses want things that can't be manufactured, can't be provided by services providers locally. So they will have to engage in trade because there's a lot of things that you want that you can't get if you don't engage in trade. So it's going to continue. It's just the flows and the pathways, I think, that will change.